So Colleen Thomas is a spiritual director and a podcast host with an MA in theology and art from Fuller Theological Seminary. She serves as the diversity outreach coordinator for Contemplative Outreach, and she is the founder and the curator of Soul Care LA. Would you join me with the sparkling hands of welcome and welcome my friend Colleen Thomas, who will be sharing this morning a talk for us on circles of belonging, examining mythic membership in these diverse times. Welcome, Colleen.
Thank you, Logan. Love being here with you at the summit and all of our friends who are here. Good morning. I'm excited to be back again for another full day. And I'm also happy to be kicking things off today with our first session. How is my audio? Can you all hear me okay? Okay, wonderful. All right. Well, I hope that we all are able to receive what is meant for us to receive in this session. That we would open our hearts and minds to what Spirit is saying to us in this time and season of our lives. And that we remember those who are not here with us today, in particular our ancestors, those family members of ours, those people along our lineage in years past who have given and sown valuable meaning into our lives. We go through this life as human beings, having this very spiritual experience, carrying so much of what has come before with us. And so may our time together today be an acknowledgement of what we're carrying, and also even perhaps a releasing of some of the things we've been carrying. I'm calling this session Circles of Belonging, examining mythic membership in divisive times. Identity is crucial to navigating place. And one characteristic of the dark night can be a heightened inability to see clearly who we are, and a difficulty in recognizing also that this inability is a fruit of the dark night, this inability to see clearly. It's the fruit is the ability to disidentify with preconceived and prepackaged ideas and value systems. And I'll unpack some of these terms as we go throughout. But these very questions, who am I? And where or with whom do I belong? The dark night is meant to rattle and dislodge some of these notions. Collectively, we can look around and ask the same questions. Who are we? Who are we? Who do we belong to? And is it possible that some of this chaos that we're in is meant to disassociate us from the circles of belonging that were once meant to give us meaning, so as to reduce or remove our attachment to our over identification with a particular social group? We can't always let go of what we cannot name. And so my intention in our time together is to help to facilitate the naming of things, of these ideas and value systems that we might be invited to let go of in this time. To talk about mythic membership, though, is to talk about what could be said, or really is, the foundational teaching of Thomas Keating, which we call the human condition. In Invitation to Love, one of his seminal books, he details this idea of mythic membership consciousness. There's a whole chapter called Mythic Membership Consciousness, but perhaps even a prerequisite to Father Thomas's understanding of the human condition, as I see it, is laid out in sort of an appendix to Opening Mind, Opening Heart. The kind of core foundational book. And in the back appendix, it's actually chapter 12, it's the guidelines for Christian life growth and transformation. And in these guidelines, he defines his view of human nature, which he says is in alignment with the Christian human origin story in Genesis, in which God created mankind and called it good. And Father Thomas says the guidelines for Christian life growth and transformation are as follows. I'm only going to read the first few. Number one, the fundamental goodness of human nature, like the mystery of the Trinity, grace, and the Incarnation, is an essential element of Christian faith. This basic core of goodness is capable of unlimited development, indeed of becoming transformed into Christ and deified. Number two, this, our basic core of goodness, is our true self. Its center of gravity is God. The acceptance of our basic goodness is a quantum leap in the spiritual journey. And number three, God and our true self are not separate. Though we are not God, God and our true self are the same thing. And he goes on, and in particular, numbers 4 through 6, which you'll have to further study and look at on your own time, all concern the theological meaning and implication of the term original sin, which in short for Father Thomas is a term to describe the human condition, which is the universal experience of coming to full reflective self-consciousness without the certitude of union with God. This belief, in other words, that God is absent, gives rise, he says, to an intimate sense of incompletion, dividedness, isolation, guilt, hence original sin, this separation, this perceived separation. It's not the result of personal wrongdoing, original sin, in Father Thomas's view. Rather, original sin causes a deep and pervasive feeling of alienation from God, others, and our true self, which brings us back to identity, which we keep returning to over this weekend. While we want to risk moving from this idea of transformation as purely personal, how I am changed by surrendering to God and how this impacts my family and friendships and relationship to work, et cetera, and all the people and circumstances I encounter in my personal day-to-day life. But we want to risk looking more broadly at how transformation changes my relationship to and with that which is outside of my normal day-to-day, right? Like how I view the stranger, how I relate to that which I have maybe no personal experience of, things like poverty or being a stranger in a foreign land, right? Being in relationship with my brothers and sisters of a different faith tradition, who speak a different language and have different customs and ways of being in the world. When I think of these examples, I can't help but acknowledge that it does seem Jesus does more teaching around these further away from my personal experience realities, and less to do with how kind I am to my own mother or sister or brother-in-law, right? Not to say kindness to one's own immediate family isn't encouraged. We want to be kind to everyone. But Jesus does spend a considerable amount of time telling stories, and in the Gospels, we are related to through these examples of how to treat the stranger. So why mythic membership consciousness? And I'm going to get into what it is too. But I find myself often teaching or talking or presenting on this topic, and it's become like somewhat of an ongoing spiritual project or spiritual practice for me. I'm really fascinated by the ways in which I unknowingly align myself with a cultural group and actions that might reveal my allegiance to a particular way of acting, responding, and behaving that's very normative in a cultural sense, but challenged by some teaching of Jesus. Like the shortest way I can explain it is that I'm often reminded how shockingly and uncomfortably un-American Jesus is, right? Like he's not an American dude. He wasn't American historically. I'm an American. We have a very different cultural orientation. So one way that I thought it might be good to illustrate this in an experiential way is to share a parable. And I like this parable. It's the parable of the sower. I like to use a more Ignatian style of practice here, a more imaginative practice where you invite you to place yourself in the scene. And because I think most of Jesus's parables were meant to disrupt or dismantle the culturally normative way of thinking and invite consideration of another way, right? The early Christians were called followers of the way. This is a good one. So I'm going to share my screen. Give me 1 second so you can see. You can see the scripture and also listen as I read it. So this is the parable of the workers in the vineyard. So invitation, choose a role, a character in this parable. There's a landowner, there's a laborer, there are many laborers, there's a manager, and sit with it. And as you listen, and I'll give us some space at the end and in between two readings to listen, imagine that you are arriving home to report the happenings of your day as a landowner, a laborer, or a manager to your spouse or a roommate or a friend or your therapist or your daughter or your son, whatever. And pay attention to the feelings that emerge as you share with them what's happened to you today. Okay, so that's just the simple guideline for this. Let me actually do a proper screen share here. There we go. This is Jesus talking. He says, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. When he went about at 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And to them he said, 'You also go into the vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right.' So they went. When he went out again about noon and about 3 o'clock, he did the same. And about 5 o'clock, he went and found others standing around. And he said to them, 'Why are you standing here idle all day?' They said to him, 'Because no one has hired us.' He said to them, 'You also go into the vineyard.' When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, 'Call the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last, then going to the first. When those hired about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage. Now, when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received the usual daily wage. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." But he replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I'm generous?" Second reading. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. When he went out about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and to them he said, "You also go into the vineyard, and I'll pay you whatever is right." So they went. When he went out again about noon and about 3 o'clock, he did the same. And about 5 o'clock, he went and found others standing around. And he said to them, "Why are you standing here idle all day?" They said to him, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You also go into the vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, "Call the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last, then going to the first." When those hired about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage. Now, when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received the usual daily wage. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." But he replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous?" This parable is included in a collection of homilies from Father Thomas. And so he has a commentary on this parable. I call this the excerpt of his commentary, "Respectable Folks." And respectable, I like the dictionary. It means regarded by society to be good, proper, or correct, right? Who doesn't want to be respectable? Father Thomas gives us something interesting to think about. He says, this parable raises questions about the standard of justice in the kingdom of God. Should not those who worked more hours have been given more? How do we get into the kingdom if it is not, something that we can earn? We enter the kingdom not by meriting, but by consenting to the invitation. Respectable folks in general do not like this parable. By respectable, I mean those who observe the norms of conventional society, but who are unaware of how much their unconscious programs for happiness are at work in their lives, and how significant a part of their good deeds are secretly motivated by the desire for acclaim, power, or security. The false self easily adjusts to whatever our cultural mindset may be and co-opts good deeds as easily as the not so good. On the spiritual journey, we need to be alert to our secret motivation. So what he's getting at here is that, and let me say this: there's nothing wrong with being respectable, right? Of course not. Yet this parable and Father Thomas's reflections on it lay a really tangible and experiential foundation, in my view, for discussing mythic membership consciousness, because there is a way we are taught to think not only about what it is to be respectable, but the parable invites us to even confront our ideas about these other kinds of systems around which we place value, right? Money, work ethic, time, the concept of fairness. You know, when we're children, we don't even know what money is. You know, someone hands a kid a penny or 2 nickels and I'm rich, you know, and then by 7 or 8, you try to give a kid 50 cents and they're like, get out of here. What am I going to do with 50 cents? You know, and by 17, you know, most teenagers, at least these days, you couldn't pay to work, you know, for even an hour, you know, so it just shows that over time in our stages of development, we learn a value system about money. And we've all been taught these values, and all values for all the social systems that are presented as norms that make up our consciousness, that tell us each day how to think, act, behave, or respond or feel. And Father Thomas called this cultural and emotional conditioning from childhood the false self in action. Our sister Tia went through that whole teaching yesterday. And a characteristic of this falseness of self is that it's so hard to identify because it seems to be our very identity. The way I think I am, or perhaps even more challenging, this false self in action seems just to be, this is the way things are, the respectable way. You know, we have these mottos in our culture. If you work hard, you'll earn a decent living. If you save up, you can buy yourself a house. If you own a business, you pay people according to the time they've worked. This stuff makes sense. So much sense we don't even think about them as value systems. They just are the way things are. I'm going to share my screen again here, because Father Thomas talks about these ideas and value systems as preconceived ideas and prepackaged value systems. And he says they're obstacles to grace, and that contemplative prayer increases our inner freedom, enabling us to reevaluate them in the light of the gospel. This is from Invitation to Love. So these are examples. This kind of how life is sayings, this is the way things work sayings, are the preconceived ideas and prepackaged value systems that become hard to notice. These thoughts produce actions. And Jesus was very intentional about subverting and challenging the preconceived ideas and prepackaged value systems of his time. What are we being invited to subvert or challenge in our times? He says also, although self-knowledge does not cure the disease, the dis-ease, at least it disposes us to work toward healing. because it shows us the harm we are doing to ourselves and to others. And trying to face the dark side of our personalities, mixed motivation, and the damage done to us in early childhood, our attitude toward our very real limitations is more important than their healing. Indeed, it is a major part of our healing. And what I take away from this is that he's making clear two things, right, that I want us to keep in mind throughout our time together. One, that we can't undo these in our own will, right? That's one. That contemplative prayer is a practice that helps to undo this false self in action and the preconceived ideas and value systems that are developed throughout our childhood. And the third thing is that he's inviting us to remember to maintain an attitude of mercy, to our limitations. And the world's standards of treatment is very different from the kingdom's, even when it relates to mercy. Cynthia was talking about this, in some ways yesterday. This is the attitude that we have to have towards our own limitations. In the kingdom, in the world, you get what you work for. In the kingdom, you get what you're open to receiving. It's a grace world, a world of unmerited favor. And we have to also have that attitude towards our own limitations, our wounds, our character defects, our less than perfect ways of thinking, acting, responding to others in life circumstances. We're just human. This is why Father Thomas calls this the human condition, right? And conditions have remedies, treatment. I started our summit yesterday with a quote before we did our centering prayer sit in the morning. That was an excerpt from this, which was Father Thomas saying, the divine remedy, the healing of the spiritual journey is through this contemplative dimension, which accesses the higher levels of consciousness available to us and to share that healing with others who are similarly afflicted. Not just so we can be redeemed, but that we might contribute something to the great individual and social ills of our time. Okay, so let's talk about mythic membership consciousness, but we need to begin talking about the human condition. I'm going to say this, there's no way to possibly cover all of this, but what I want to remind you all, if you are familiar, and invite you to, if you are not, that everything that I am sharing with you today is available for free on the Contemplative Outreach website. It is the gift that Father Thomas Keating left us, which is called the Spiritual Journey series. He goes through the entire human condition and all of the various models of the human condition. I'm going to just lay a broad stroke here of the models of the human condition so that we can put into context the mythic membership level of consciousness, and that we might become more accustomed to allowing the tension of these times to dismantle some of these preconceived ideas and prepackaged value systems, because this is the crux of the whole teaching, the models of the human condition, that's supported by the practice of centering prayer, or practice of centering prayer supports these teachings, however you want to look at it. But the nature of the Spiritual Journey series, in addition to teaching us the method and the fruits of the practice itself, is designed to illuminate the false self in action, deepen our awareness of our own mythic membership consciousness, which essentially is over-identification with the ideas and value systems shaped by our social and cultural groups, and to support the dismantling of these emotional programs that might even be obstacles to our very engagement with the conflicts of our times. In fact, what I find interesting and why I keep coming back to this, I think, is because Father Thomas seems to have been so convinced that dealing with our mythic membership consciousness was so crucial in our current evolutionary and existential time and history that he said surpassing or transcending or evolving beyond the mythic membership level is the real work of life at this point in human evolution. I quote, the real work of life at this point in our human evolution. And it's really easy for us to be on this path and look at these levels of consciousness and assume or presume that we, because we've been sitting for so many years, because we're in our centering prayer groups, because we've gone on retreats, that we're automatically, boom, we're operating at that intuitive level of consciousness, or at least the mental egoic level of consciousness. So I find it very engaging to hear Father Thomas say that it's this mythic membership level of consciousness that's the work of our time. In the human condition, all right, I'm going back to my slides here. Whoops. Okay, here we go. In the human condition, Father Thomas is establishing a framework. You know, he says that for the Christian, our conceptual background is basically scripture, doctrine, you know, Trinity, incarnation, meaning of grace. But to add to this importance of understanding what it is to be human, we're also looking at contemporary science, sociology, human developments, especially psychology. He says we'll be basically asking ourselves, who are you? Where are you? It's precisely in understanding the human condition with the help of revelation, with the help of psychology and other contemporary sciences that will cast the light on human values and will be understanding exactly what contemplative prayer addresses. And he begins with laying the foundation of many models. Like I said, I'm not going to go through all of those models. Starting with the evolutionary model, he outlines the evolutionary model, the existential model, the philosophical model. He includes other models like an aesthetic model, which is like in a spiritual theology, understanding of healing virtues of the Beatitudes and the like. And another model he calls a model of Christian transformation, which is more mystical theology. We are going to stick with the evolutionary and the existential, and we're really only going to scratch the surface. These are the levels of consciousness according to the evolutionary model, which is more of a biological model. It is important to note, if you're not familiar with this, that a lot of this work that he did was in tandem with teachings of Ken Wilber, who was an integral psychologist. I just want to note that. Here are the levels of consciousness according to the evolutionary model. It begins at the Eurobric level, in which we're immersed in nature. The Eurobic level is concerned with an immediate fulfillment of needs, a survival instinct. There's no self-consciousness really at this level. At the Tephanic level, there's an emergence of a body self, and there's a significant but still very limited distinction of self-identity that's marked by an inability to distinguish imagination from reality or apart from the whole. At the mythic membership level, we start seeing language and socialization, farming versus hunting. And this farming culture opens wide the possibility for planning a future, for leisure, time between planting seasons, which leads to a stratification of society. There's business and government, social classes evolving in this phase, and the dawn of reasoning. with logical, not abstract thinking to care for instinctual needs. And I'll come back and share a little bit more about that level. At the mental egoic level, we're seeing the distinction of the body self from the environment, one's identity coming from the social unit, mind body distinction, transcendence of reason, of emotion, repression in the body, and feminine values. And at the intuitive level, we're accessing spiritual level of being, psychic gifts and insights into a sense of belonging and unity with God and cosmos. One thing to note here that this is not a linear process, collectively or personally. He goes into so much detail about the ranges of age and where we are at our stage of life that we're entering into these, not alone where we are in the stage of human evolution at each of these levels. But what I want to point out about these levels of consciousness and his really stark statements about the mythic membership consciousness level being the real work of life at this point in human evolution, what's happening at this level? You know, that it's characterized by things like like a period of socialization, the development of the city state. The farming versus hunting is significant because it means you now have a surplus, he says, and can plan the future. And that surplus means some people can have leisure, other people have to work. Some people have the leisure to attend to religious ritual and exercises and storing up resources. And that those who can store up resources and those who cannot brings about this stratification where there's kings and nobles and patrons and clients and slaves and soldiers. And then because of those stratifications, we also see the development of possessions, the capacity to trade and do business. So this is almost sounds very much like society as we know it today, right? This is where he talks about the importance of this mythic membership in our present stage. He says, as long as we put a great value in belonging to a group, then we draw our identity more or less from the attitudes and the expectations of the group and are not free to move into personal responsibility, which is characteristic of the mental egoic level. I guess it can be said that few people have really accessed the mental egoic level, and that this is really the work of life at this period of human evolution. In other words, to become fully human, to become a full reflective self-consciousness, a strong ego with its personal identity. That is the present stage of the evolutionary process. I'm going to stop my screen share just for a moment because I like to see you and see others. And I know I'm going through a lot of information pretty quickly, and I'll make sure you have the resources to look at it. But we're here at this mythic membership consciousness level now, in which we're being invited to understand that mythic membership is characterized by over-identification with the group. Keating says this is the dominant characteristic of mythic membership consciousness, where we derive our identity from these social units that exist now in this stratification of society. And we have membership and we tend to give the group of unquestioning loyalty. He doesn't even say tend, he says we give the group unquestioning loyalty. The sense of belonging to something important gives us feelings of security, pleasure, and power. We heard these terms a lot yesterday, right? The security, pleasure, and power. And those terms come up when we get into the existential model. I'm going to go back to my screen share. When Father Thomas moves us through the existential model, which is essentially looking at our human development and where we begin to individual human development, and where we begin to see these terms that We were hearing yesterday security, power, affection, esteem. The false self system is what is outlined in the existential model. The emotional programs for happiness. And these other terms emerged, the pre-rational energy centers. What's interesting is that what's often overlooked when we talk about the programs for happiness, we hear frequently the program for security, the program for affection and esteem, and the program for power and control. But mythical membership is also included in one of the programs for happiness. And we can see it in this chart here, which are all throughout the spiritual journey series and the human condition in particular, the relationship between the aerobic level and the security centers of survival and security, the typhonic level and the sensation and power centers where we have affection and esteem and power and control. And here is mythic membership, which we discussed in more detail. And it's the energy center is marked by group over identification. He says in this session on these pre-rational energy centers about the emotional program for happiness, mythical membership, the group has an uncanny, almost a compulsion to protect itself and to resist constructive change. This is the tendency that goes with an over-identification with one's particular group. And the first group we come into contact with, of course, is with our parents. Now, there's nothing wrong with experiencing loyalty to our roots and to our sources and to our parents and to our country. And in fact, this is a virtue and it's reasonable. But when one is under the influence of the energy centers, this modifies what is reasonable in one's loyalty and gratitude, and it becomes a peer group pressure that demands a certain conformity of conduct from us, whether or not our conscience fully approves of what is being done. And this whether or not is important because actually, he says later that this false self system is thoroughly in place when we arrive at the age of reason, which again is here when we arrive when we arrive at the age of reason, and so is our group identification. It's at this point then that reason begins to come into effect, but it is unable usually to reevaluate what went before, and it tends to be used in the service of or to be co-opted by the energy centers in order to make them work better by using the energy of the brain to rationalize, justify, glorify, and discover new ways and new skills and getting what we think will make us happy. We all have notions of the proper way to be a husband, wife, father, mother, employee, or employer, and a proper way to be a member of our parish or religious community. These preconceived ideas lock us into one way of doing things. This is what I mean by over-identification with the values of our group. Our preconceived ideas and prepackaged value systems are obstacles to grace. I'm returning to that and also ending with that in a way also to raise this question for us, what needs to be reevaluated in the light of the Gospels and grace? And a way of reevaluation, I also offer as an invitation to a sort of examine of mythic membership consciousness. I do this from time to time, and that in times of heightened tension and division, the stage is almost set for me to be more honest, to look at who I belong to, where I feel my loyalties rising up, and from where my preconceived ideas and prepackaged value systems derived, derive. What are my what are my social groups? And I've created a bit of an exercise that I share with folks, and I'm going to share with you here to think about the categories of social groups, all of these areas in the natural course of our human growth and development, which continues, as we all know, beyond childhood and into our elderly years, continuous growth and changes in ways that we identify and play. Then I think about these social groups as also circles of belonging. So where do I belong politically? Where do I find myself belonging professionally? Where do I find myself belonging socioeconomically, religiously, culturally, ethnically? I look also at my moral authorities, all of these areas that I can derive my preconceived ideas and prepackaged value systems from. Who are my moral authorities? Who am I listening to? Who am I getting information from? Who is feeding me my values? What are my operating belief systems? This is the kind of thing that came up with the parable, right? Life isn't fair, or if you work hard, you'll get a good wage. These are also shifting, or maybe need to shift at any time in our life and on our journey, especially because Father Thomas mentions too that the first group we come into contact with is our family. And as we know, our family has a huge influence on us. What values did I learn from my family? Are there familiar family mottos or sayings you can recall, like certain expressions your mother or father would often say that's indicative of the way they saw the world, that become principles they encourage the kids to live by, or ways you've done that as parents, and how that might have changed for you as grandparents? I'll end with this. This is Keating's final thought in the closing reflection on the parable of the workers from the Book of Homilies. He says, in the parable, grace is symbolized by the mysterious need of the householder for more workers. And it seems to be urgent, manifested by the fact that he went out every couple of hours to find more workers. Those who accepted his invitation entered, and at the end of the day, all received the same recompense. Grace is God's need to respond to our need. Our need is what creates God's need to reach out to us, even if we do not realize how needy we actually are. God's greatest gift, response to our need, is, of course, to offer us the divine life itself. The spiritual journey enables us to appreciate more and more the total gratuity of the divine goodness. Acceptance of the invitation is the key to belonging to the kingdom. What this says to me, and I want to leave with you, is that the more we let go of, more ideas, the more values, systems, the more room we have to embrace a kingdom view of what to really value and what to really hold to be true or right or just in our world today. So thank you for hanging with me. I'm going to leave us there.
Thank you, Colleen. Wow. Yeah. I want to hold invitation to love up as well.
Mm-hmm.
Just in case you do not have a copy.
Yeah.
May I recommend? Yes.
And this is The Kingdom of God is Like, which was really my first introduction to Keating. Now, I don't think they still publish this, but you might be able to find copies on, the alternative booksellers. This is a great resource.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you, Colleen. Again, this is what a feast. Um, Also, what a reminder to all of us practitioners of centering prayer, meditation, that, and a huge thank you to the organization you work for as well, Contemplative Outreach. I entered that into the chat as well for others. Not to take you away from here now, speaking to everybody, but
Mhm.
the link is there if you want to open it in a browser. We'll have it in the resources as well, so no worries. But I just want you to know of it, that, of course, was already mentioned, but that you make sure that you make note that it's
Yeah.
there. What incredible, incredible things. Oh, man. Wow. Well, why don't we take a few moments here? We already have a question from Sarah, um, and I will get to that in a moment. Um, but I guess what is standing out to me right here is what you mentioned, this kingdom of God, or this reign of ultimate reality,
Mm.
this presence that is meaning for us to surrender to it, to release into it, so that it might matter here. And what I heard you say is, it's a grace world. It's
Mhm.
um, and I also heard you say, Colleen, that we can't undo stages of development, things that have happened, of course, that are within us. Perhaps provided for, provisional in a sense, but yet a part of our necessary development here. And
Mhm.
we can't undo that with willpower, with our own will, um, no matter how hard we try. And then I also heard you say that they are developed, and I heard you say that we must remember an attitude of mercy that reminds us of our limitation.
Mhm. Yes, absolutely. And I think I also noted we can't undo it, but clearly we are being invited into a process of participation with the undoing,
Indeed.
right?
Indeed. Yes.
Right. And I often, like in spiritual direction, I'll often share this example of, many times in the Gospels when Jesus is healing, someone comes to Jesus for healing and he says, "What do you want me to do for you?" And the importance of being able to name what needs to be undone, what needs to be let go. And that's a participation process too, right? Because it's often, and it comes through the practice and the unloading of our consciousness, and that we become awake to some part of us that was repressed, some part of us that is prejudice, some part of us that sees very dualistically, some part of us that is like, whoa, I didn't know this was in me. And
Mm-hmm.
then we can say, please take this from me.
Yeah. And perhaps that is what we can do with our will, is surrender to that.
Yes. And I like, relating that to Cynthia's talk yesterday too, the value in um, staying present to it, and entering into. I mean, this is the whole crux of the Christian doctrine, right? The incarnation was an entering into our suffering. And so it's going to be uncomfortable to learn the ways in which we are over identified with a group. But let's be incarnational even in our own practice, that we're willing to even enter into our own suffering on this healing and growth journey that we're on.
Yes. Okay, so over to the first question from Sarah. Sarah is asking, why are we not taught this more in centering prayer circles?
Well, Sarah, this is what I'm so passionate about because it's in the core curriculum. I think we don't return to the teaching because it's really uncomfortable. I think it's less uncomfortable to just talk about the other programs we can identify, but this thing of over identification with a group and our family being our first group, it is really close to home because I don't want to know that what I was taught was the way things are is not the way things is. It's just uncomfortable.
Mm, yeah.
So it is there and it is literally there. And maybe someone can find the exact link. I see Pamela's in here, like for the spiritual journey series, the human condition, the evolutionary model. That is the click, and you will be into the teaching.
Sarah also said that loving and welcoming our full selves, quote unquote, false self and all, is the way to healing. I just hear talk about the false self and also basically trying to get rid of it or ignore its needs. This is a huge shift in perspective, a more fully formed perspective. Thank you, Colleen. Multiple exclamation points. So important. Smiley face and a huge hug emoji, too.
Thanks, Sarah.
We have a comment by, Pamela Begeman. What struck me most is that mythical membership consciousness has us unknowingly go against our conscience. Still
Mm,
small voice is overridden.
yes, Pamela. Oh, that's so painful. I think we see this in those, like, those studies that they do of like, like on racism with the little kids who play with each other and how there's no concept at all of difference. We're taught these things. And that is going against our conscience. But it doesn't just happen when we're 5, it also happens when we're 25. And then we get really attached to them when we're 25. And then suddenly one day we're 45 and we're 65 and we still have that idea.
Yeah. The next one is from, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, Noe or Noe, Noe with an accent. She says, I am confused because one's identity comes from the social unit is written at the mental egoic level in that slide with the pyramid. But you
Mm-hmm.
seem to say that it is the main problem of the mythic membership level. Can you clarify? Um, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to do my best. And I don't know if that's my Noemi from our spiritual journey group. You know how complicated this teaching is. I think there is more of a social identity, as in an awareness of a social identity at that mental egoic level. Whereas the mythic membership level, there's a group belonging without the awareness. So that's why the mental egoic level is on the path towards a higher level of consciousness. I could be wrong. This is my own study of this teaching, and I've been in it and I'm going to stay in it, and I want us all to stay in it. So if you learn differently, please let me know.
Thank you. Next is from Jasmine. So, Colleen, thank you first for this beautifully powerful presentation. I have recently added Keating to my literature review for the work I've been called to, the transformative work of love in marketplace leadership. What advice do you think Keating would have for me as I bump up against this particular mythic membership?
Oh, say that again, please.
Yes. What advice do you think Father Keating would have for me as I bump up against this particular mythic membership as she's doing work at the transformative work of love in marketplace leadership?
Marketplace, yeah. I think this is the question that we all have. It's like as we bump up against this in the marketplace, as we bump up against this in our families over the holidays, one, I think the main thing is in your question, which is love. You know, it's not, I'm not sure that it would be calling it out because we see it. Um, you know, Part of the healing journey is experiencing a transformation and being able to remain in a place of love and openness and acceptance, not expecting that everyone be at the same place on the journey with us, right? That because that too easily leads to judgment and then more separation and more division. And I see that conflict. I'm in that conflict. On the one hand, I have my sisters who are, have very strong views politically and socially. And then I have friends who, and I share most of their views. But then I have friends who are on a total different side than I am politically and socially, but I remain friends with them. My sisters don't think I should be friends with them. I'm able to maintain the friendships because I'm not demanding that everyone see things the way that I do. However, that mentality does challenge me because then I think, if we were still living in pre-Civil War America, and, I had friends who were on the abolitionist side and friends who were on the Confederate side, would I be friends with people who were in the Confederacy? That's a tough call. I don't know where to draw the line. I feel like I would draw that line. Just like I feel like I wouldn't have abandoned Jesus at the crucifixion, but most of his friends did. So I don't know. I just know that my intention is love and acceptance and faithfulness. But I'm human, and so is everybody else.
Yeah. Thanks, Colleen. We have a few more, and I just want to also make a note that we are prioritizing actually voicing these through the hosts. So thank you for your understanding. There's just an overwhelm of a lot of questions. So thanks for understanding that, and hope to get to them all. So the next one is from Matt. With Minnesota on our minds and hearts, could we use that as a specific context to further anchor the ideas that you shared, Colleen? What comes up for you there?
I would say what we could use Minnesota and how Minnesota challenges me. And I actually just this morning looked at some videos and news clips. I don't always see everything. And some things I feel like are important to see. What I notice right away is there's sides. There's sides. And what that invites me to notice right away is what side am I on? And that's what I think mythic membership consciousness invites us to reflect on, right? Which group side are you on? Which group are you in? Are you in the he had a gun, no one should have guns? Are you in the disrupt the peace, no one should disrupt the peace? Are you in the there's all these opportunities for us to identify with a group, and there's layers of these groups in every situation. I think what mythic membership consciousness invites us is to just notice where we're locking in to a group.
Yeah.
And then maybe next, what Keating says, reflect on it in light of the gospel.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the basic exercise across every situation, circumstance, and conflict. I have the basics like life is precious, all life, when it comes to Minnesota. And so grief for Alex Preddy, and grief for everyone who didn't make the news cycle today, who lost their life today in regions of the world that never make it into our news media. Because so many of us are perishing as a result of violence. It's part of the human condition, violence. But the work that I really need to do is to stay open to the grief. That's harder for me. Some of us, it's easier. But for some of us, and I'm one of them, it's harder for me to stay open to the grief. Logan, you're close to the grief guy.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. I got to work at that.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I'll do some examining about that.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that helps.
Yeah. So we have limited amount of time and seemingly unlimited amount of questions. So I'm going to try to get to all of them that I can, and I ask for your forgiveness if I don't get to yours. So from Christo, Thomas Merton had said, and he quotes, before you can jump off your tower, you have to have a tower built that you can jump off of. End of quote. Could you speak to the situation people are in who have not built much of a coherent mythic membership, ego identity, sense of achievement, family system, sense of pride?
Who have not built a coherent. Okay, what I hear in that question that I'm going to respond to, because that's a deep question, Christo. You would have been upset if I asked you a question like that. Just kidding.
All in love.
What I hear in that, though, is I'm going to say this. I left this part out of my presentation, but I shared briefly that Father Thomas, a lot of this work was in tandem with the work of Ken Wilber, who was an integral psychologist. I am aware that all of this teaching, and we talk about this in our spiritual journey group, some of the teaching, I'm not going to say some, all of the teaching probably needs to be reevaluated in the light of the gospel itself, because it originated from men from a certain cultural time and place. These men were the whole lineage of psychology leading into integral psychology is a very white, Western, Eurocentric model of evolution. You know, some could argue that, and Keating does speak to this, what was lost in the movement from the Uroric and Typhonic levels of consciousness to the quote unquote higher levels of consciousness. Because what's wrong with being close to nature, and what's wrong with, in some ways, being more connected to our instincts, right? And he talks about how what we've lost in that way, some of the feminine qualities, some of the indigenous qualities that were lost in this evolution according to white, male, Western, Eurocentric psychological models.
Yeah.
And we need to examine that as well. So there are some people maybe who don't need to be coherent to it, who maybe are better off not having an awareness. But I don't think our group applies. Like, I think most of us who are American, who are influenced by white, Western, Eurocentric models of philosophy, psychology, we have that work to do. So, does that answer some part of that? I hope.
Yeah. Yeah. Probably the last one. So from Tiffany, she says, to use some of the language offered, an inquiry I continue to hold, what might be a respectable identification with an identity, look/feel, instead of over-identification?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's the question that we also have to ask, right? Especially as we are um, able now to celebrate marginalized identities. This fine line of over identification and identity, as women, our 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 ancestors who are at the forefront of feminism and women's rights, like the identity of a woman and what makes a woman, is these are important things that we have to hold. The Black community went through this experience. Black is beautiful. Our queer brothers and sisters are going through this experience. So I don't have a clear answer to that. What I have and what I hope to impart is that the importance that we're always asking the question, am I over identifying with this or that? And I also think about what identity, what truly, when I leave this body, who am I? I think there's a lot more, there's mystical meaning in God not identifying God's self. And not to mention that Keating and his colleagues in mysticism ultimately end some of this journey and evolution at no self. So, and I'm definitely not qualified to talk about that, so I won't say more.
Yeah. Well, I might ask you to say more if you want, and that's just, I want to open this floor to you here as a sort of a closing. Is there one thing that like you would like to say, not on that, but just from your heart, to everybody at the summit as we now close this time?
Just that the enthusiasm and engagement with this presentation is just fills me with so much hope. Although I'm not surprised because I know who we are, a community of seekers. And as I said, I think in the opening, just I see the 200 plus of you and know that there are so many more of us in the world who are asking the questions and living the way. And